Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 as well as on the web at WFHR.com. It's time for our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. The phone lines are open. I don't want to do all the questioning today. It's your chance to talk directly to the mayor of the city of Wisconsin Rapids. You can do that by calling 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. With that, we welcome the mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Carl. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, I guess we can complain about the wind and everything else, but at least we didn't get what they got just to the east of us.
Although my piece of my backyard fence blew over. So
I had some big tree branches down on my property, too.
Uh-huh.
So, and everybody, the color season is fastly ending.
It is, now with the wind, yeah.
And the wind, I mean, the leaves are down on the ground.
Quickly.
Yeah, quickly, and that's the way Wisconsin is. But you were at an interesting meeting last night. And we had, and they unfortunately can't make it on Thursday, but I was hoping we could get somebody on Thursday morning to talk about it from the foundation standpoint, and that's the update on the Tribune Building project. There, a little issue with the parking lot, which is kind of throwing a curveball. After all the plans. So what happened at last night's meeting? What can you tell us?
So I guess for listeners too, since we normally come on after the city council meeting, no city council meeting last night. It'll be next Tuesday. That's just the way the calendar happened to fall this month. But last night's meeting was a somewhat of a special meeting, I guess, that has been characterized for the Tribune Building meeting project. And 2 weeks ago, the meetings officially wrapped up with their facilitated Concordia connection, who's the design and facilitation firm that they've been working with on the Tribune Building project. So that wrapped up 10 meetings in the last 12 months. Last night's meeting was specific to two components, one of which was how do participants and residents feel about the space surrounding the Tribune Building project, specific to the footprint and the parcel around the Tribune Building. So now that the design is done internally and the neat part about last night was a lot of the architectural drawings and initial architectural drawings were shared. So people got their first glimpse, as I did, to what the building may look like when they begin construction next year. So that was exciting, very cool, very kind of forward-thinking, innovative design and approach to that facility. We talked about some renewable energy elements on the roof, a lot of natural light, a lot of windows toward the river and surrounding the area. Talked about it being a kind of a beacon in the downtown area. So I think it was really neat, and given their connection with the Art Place America grant that they were a recipient of, which was $400,000, they incorporate a lot of artistic elements into the design, which was neat to see that it's truly going to be a building, a one-of-a-kind structure in not only in our city but our area, I think, when they're all done. So last night's meeting wasn't a facilitated meeting like it was like the previous 10, let's say, were. It was more about talking about how can residents get engaged beyond the Tribune Building project now that the kind of design meetings are completed. And so the first activity was around specific space around the Tribune Building, the parking lot that the Tribune, the city owns right behind the building, what may happen between the streets and any other connection to the waterfront, all those pieces. And then the second piece of that was how do we get residents and individuals interested in redevelopment in the city? And in this case, it was the downtown waterfront district. From my standpoint, the city for 30 years has invested in planning documents. I don't bring them all with me. I've got one with me. I see that we've invested in, right? Residents have invested in with their public tax dollars. City administrations have pushed for. So I think we've got enough planning done. It's about now the time for us to begin implementing. And so the discussion last night was how do we get residents aware of the plans, first of all, and get their hands on copies, but also to become sort of energized and enthused about what else beyond the Tribune Building they might get involved in seeing implemented in the city.
Yeah, in other words, we had a lot of excitement about this, let's take that excitement and move it now to the next thing. What do we do with the rest of the riverfront, with the downtown? And as you mentioned, there's been all sorts of different plans, ideas for condos, what have you.
Yeah.
And that's all they were.
That's right. That's right. They and for one reason or another, I'm a firm believer that some of those plans were a bit before their time and the circumstances. I mean, a planning document is meant to be somewhat dynamic, that it isn't just a point in time, that if time goes on, that the planning document no longer is relevant. I think these are relevant today. Obviously, we've got the natural asset within the river in the downtown, so I think some of those elements still remain. The question is, property ownership has changed hands. Some property is in hands that, in this case, may not support the goals and the vision of the downtown redevelopment. So, there's definitely some concern in that regard. That how do we implement these plans when property is held by maybe a certain individual or other entities that may not support the redevelopment as the plan says.
Yeah, how do you go about that?
Well,
I mean, somebody can put a
challenge.
wrench, one person could put a wrench into a community dream just because they don't like it.
The whole thing, right on. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the way of the world. The democracy. You can only govern so much and still get certain things done to the extent that it's possible. And there are tools municipalities have for infrastructure projects. So if you want to build a street and you've got to take land for public purposes in that regard, there's definitely eminent domain powers the city has, but not always do they have the power to be able to say, we want that land for this development. There's no case for that.
Can we do, instead of a stick approach, can we do a carrot? Let's sit down and talk.
Yeah, and that's kind of my conversation, I actually spoke last night at the Tribune Building meeting, and one of the points I made was it's not always about ownership, that regardless of whether or not we need to have ownership or a certain entity needs to have ownership, but it's about partnership. How can a partnership be established to be able to say, okay, while you may own the property, maybe we can agree to certain design and redevelopment elements that can assist not only a project maybe next door, in the case of the Tribune Building, but how can it maybe benefit the public good as a whole? And I think there's definitely opportunity in that regard. So it isn't always about winning and losing or owning and not owning a piece of property. It's how can we all work together to be able to preserve the public good of whatever the use of the land might be.
Okay. Have there been any discussions with the entity, quote unquote, that bought the parking lot?
Well, Muppet Properties, when it's been reported by the Tribune and others that Susan Feith is the agent, registered agent underneath Muppet Properties, and Susan has, and so is is Mead-Witter Foundation, has also acquired property over the years in the downtown. Obviously, that presents challenges because when you consider tracts of land that are particularly contiguous to a certain property, logically, the end use you'd like to think would support the adjacent use, and in this case the Tribune Building. And so the vacant parking lot that she had purchased with her entity Muppet Properties, we don't know her plans for that yet. I have not been able to get, in fact, her and I exchanged emails yesterday to try to get on the calendar so we can maybe discuss that amongst other things, because frankly, while it's not etched in stone, I think there's an expectation that when you acquire property, there's an intended use, right, for that property.
You have an idea of what you want to do with it.
Correct. And so it isn't about owning and buying property for the sake of owning and buying property, right?
I can't imagine anybody wanting to own a parking lot. It's not generating any income. It's not so unless you're going to start charging people. I don't understand. There has to be an end game someplace. Right.
So obviously, it's of the city's best interest to understand that, because we want to support any developers sort of position and redevelopment.
It could be that she has a dream of what she would like to do that might be very compatible.
Yeah, absolutely, which we'd love to see, right? That's ultimately what we'd like to see. So working past some of these, we'll call them hurdles or curveballs that come along the way, undoubtedly are some things you just don't expect, and some you just got to react and adapt to the circumstances at the time. So last night's meeting was really positive in the sense that it channeled people beyond the energy enthusiasm of the Tribune Building, that there are I'll call them opportunity zones within our downtown, and it's by way of just the evolution of the downtown. We've talked a lot, the campaign, and even now, it's still my position that it isn't just the only place where we need to be spending effort and spending time, but there is opportunity there. And number one, we've got a TIF district, and when you create a TIF district, the whole purpose of a TIF district is to create increments. So any new development, any new dollar of development goes right back into projects within the TIF. So if we want to improve Jackson Street, for example, which is along the TIF in some areas, or some of the other street reconstruction or underground utilities, the best way to afford those is to have new development, which then generates new dollars to fund the TIF. So the Tribune building today remains in the tax roll, and so it's in our best interest to attract outside dollars and investment into that building, but then also keep elements that make sense based on its end use will remain in the tax roll. So our support and intention of the project is very understood in the fact that it's going to generate a positive cash flow within the downtown TIF district that was created years ago. So that'll allow us and enable us to do other projects in the TIF.
Are they still talking about next spring sometime starting construction on the Tribune building? I think that was the timeline.
Yeah, June of 15. The property would be, the architectural work and design work would be done, and then construction could start after that. Now, last night they announced that there's a financing vehicle available to certain census tracts, geographic census tracts, and it's called the New Market Tax Credit. It's an NMTC is the acronym. Very complicated funding mechanism, but they were actually nominated for $6 million in tax credits for the redevelopment of the Tribune building. So essentially it boils down to there are wealthy individuals that need tax breaks, right? Or they want to buy tax credits. So it's a federal government program that's existed since the 2000s, early 2000s, and actually before that, the 90s. And that program is meant to offset certain tax liabilities people may have on the federal level. Big banks is a primary example. Well, in exchange of that, projects like the Tribune building and other kind of under invested communities, like I would say, in fact, the census tract calls the southwest side of, so anything south of West Grand out this way, all the way down to the river as a low to moderate income, and there's some geographic data that qualify that area for new investment, and in this case, so that'll help them obviously get equity in the project so they can attract further investment as they go forward, and ultimately help the value of it not only in the tax base but also to the community.
This project has been getting national recognition, as we've talked about, with the different grants and what have you. What does that mean for the city, from your perspective, to have your city in this effort, which is citizen involvement and driven almost? Yeah. What does that mean for the city?
Well, it's always very exciting to be in a first of its kind sort of project, and I think this is, by any stretch of imagination, all of that and then some. That residents leading, residents really sort of defining its final use is very exciting, because we know that once the building is constructed, redeveloped, constructed, and open, it will now stand the test of time into the future. That it will attract. I mean, these outside groups that have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars have almost a duty upon themselves to showcase what their investment is. So we know that there already has been, but we know when the property is open and fully functioning again, that there will be visitors that will come from afar to look at the property and to see and to understand how that development occurred. So that's very exciting, because as we've tried to look at ourselves past stigmas that have been attached to our community and some of the negativity, this is certainly an example of something that our community has persevered in ways that it hasn't had to before, and as a result, we've got something to show for it. We've got a physical example representation of that, and that's going to be the neat part.
If you're just joining us on the Morning Magazine, welcome. We're having our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. As always, the phone lines are open at 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. Budget time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the budget's been sent to the older people, and I guess let's start off with a little bit of the highlights of your new budget.
Sure. Well, similar constraints as previous years. As we're all aware, we operate under levy limits, so we have the inability to levy very little new taxes. So we're really operating under the dollars that we already we already have levied, on the tax roll. So that's a challenge for us because cost of living increases, wage increases, just cost of doing business. When you talk a paving contractor, for example, and you look at increases in the double digits, how do you absorb those costs if you want to keep doing at least the amount of reconstruction, let's say, or new investment in infrastructure that we like to do every year, just to stay on par and to stay kind of on track for a replacement cycle that we all can live with, so we don't have major breaks in infrastructure or we don't have major issues in our roadways. So that's obviously a starting point for us, not to mention the very limited discretionary dollars that leaves us. So the dollars we like to maybe invest in a new project or a special project for the year, very limited, and obviously they're very competitive. Departments have submitted all their requests to myself and the finance director, and we vet those requests, we go through them. So all the departments, city departments, inclusive of the library, the cemetery, the Humane Society, anybody else we fund, we get those requests. And so we start paring them down. We look at what can we fund, what's our discretionary dollar ability to fund some of these special projects, and it's very limited. So in the area of public safety this year, new radios. There's a narrow banding directive from the federal government that we need to narrow band our radios, and they're very, very, very expensive.
Oh, yeah.
In the tens of thousands of dollars every year that we'll have to get on a replacement cycle to replace those. Obviously, there's a public safety component, and they're essential, we would say, to what we have to do. So some of those things become less and less discretionary. It's kind of what is the directive from other governmental units that you just have to do these things. So in addition to that, on the revenue side of things, really had a kind of not so good news in the manufacturing sector. Both NewPage and Ocean Spray had a state objection to their assessment. So everyone gets their assessment
That's
bill.
becoming a little SOP for a lot of these companies, isn't it?
Yeah, especially because they find a really good attorney who receives a nice chunk of what they receive back in a reduction of their valuation as their payout, right? So
Sure.
In this case, NewPage had objected in a much more significant way, but the two together resulted in about a $10.2 million reduction in their tax bills. So obviously, who does it affect? It affects us on the local level, because that $10.2 million now will be spread across the base, because we don't reduce our budget by the proportionate amount of what that 10.2 would result in tax revenue. In the same way, we only had about less than 1% of growth, so 0.98%, so less than a 1% growth in net new construction. So that's the number that allows us to levy new taxes. So you look at you start off with kind of a reduction in your base value, and then you only have a 1% growth in your value. Those things offset very quickly, and so there's very limited ability to do much else than we would do other years.
How is your efforts to transform to an activity-based budgeting system affect? Is it fully implemented in this budget?
I would say it's probably 75% of the way there. There are some departments that it's just going to take time. Now, I'll tell you where it was beneficial was in this budget, for example, when you start saying, well, if we're going to absorb cost increases here, what other activity are we going to do less of? Well, one such example was we wanted to do more in the the street maintenance area as it relates to concrete streets. A lot of the expressway and Highway 34 North and let's say even 8th Street are reaching a questionable life point in its life of whether or not we still invest what we do to keep the road surface in a shape that we all can enjoy and don't complain about, in a regular basis. So we shifted dollars from what we used to spend in just basic sidewalk replacement, so just squares around the city and sidewalk replacement and inspection, and rolled some of those dollars into the concrete street repair this next year. And the theory obviously is, again, the aging infrastructure we have in some of those 4-lane streets is catching up to us, and the DOT unfortunately doesn't have any replacement plans for them. So what does that do? It forces us to keep maintaining them until they decide to replace them. So that's the one challenge. But in terms of activity-based budgeting, as Carl has referred to, activity-based budgeting is really just that. What activities are we doing in a certain year? So we in our budgets have a way to look down to the park department, for example, and Whitterfield, and to say how much maintenance dollars and how much labor dollars are being allocated to Whitterfield. Can we spend less there? Can we spend more there? Why do we want to spend more there? And have those discussions in ways that we didn't before. Because before, our budgets included bodies. And it was never much of a planning document as much as it is now, where we now have department heads thinking about what sort of routine maintenance they need to accomplish, and then what are the dollars that need to go along with that.
And then you combine Lean Six Sigma and that methodology,
Correct.
where you're learning how to do things more efficiently.
Yes.
That could prove to be help save taxpayers money.
That's right. In a perfect world, it will, and it will do it quickly. Now, in this world, it's not perfect, and things take much time,
Sure.
and they take a lot of buy-in.
But changing a culture.
Correct. And it's all about the mindset shift in how we approach certain projects. And in this case, one such example that's been a positive example that's come to fruition in this budget is the use of polymer at the wastewater treatment plant. In the last couple of years, our polymer costs have just skyrocketed, just spiraled out of control, and chlorine usage and some other things. And part of it's attributed to the waste streams we're getting from our industrial users, the landfill, the cranberry processors, etc. So it's working at it from that standpoint, but it's also working at it from the plant standpoint. How can our operators operate it more efficiently? And in this case, efficiently translates to less dollars on chemicals like polymer and chlorine. And the cool thing about the Lean Six Sigma project is it pulls those frontline people together with management to say, how do we fix this? How do we fix this problem? And in this budget, you'll see a reduction in polymer usage because it's just not necessary, because they've been able to operate it a little bit more efficiently.
Well, you just hit on something. Throughout my working life, going back to college when I was working factory jobs, whether it be at a paper mill or at a canning factory, one of the complaints of workers always has been, I wish they would ask us before they implement something.
Right.
We know how it's supposed to be going, how it should be done. And in this methodology, you're basically saying, okay, let's do that.
Right. Yep. Right on. Mm-hmm.
So-
Mm-hmm. And it does. It empowers those frontline people who do have a perspective that the management doesn't have. And I think it's powerful. It's more powerful than it sounds, because it really does elevate perspectives and elevates opinions in a way that weren't asked for previously.
And you know what? When people see their ideas being implemented or taken seriously, all of a sudden they buy into feeling a part of that enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer, that just happens to be my job.
Correct. That's very true.
Okay. We got to take our first break this morning. Again, the phone lines are open if you want to talk to the mayor about anything, whether it be the Tribune Building Project downtown, or you got a particular issue on your street. We don't care. 424-2600, pound 1320 on our U.S. cellular phone. The Morning Magazine, as always, is brought to you by Comfort Air.
Good morning, and welcome back to The Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thanks again, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. It's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. The phone lines are open at 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on our U.S. cellular phone. Hey, folks, call up now because you got plenty of time to talk. What's going to happen, and it usually does, Your Honor, so the first person calls and then they go, okay, I guess it's not that hard. They start calling and then it's near the end of the show and all of a sudden, sorry, we are out of time.
Time's up.
So we want you to have plenty of time. You mentioned parks, and in your new newsletter that just came out via my email, you talked about Whitterfield planned changes and improvements. We've talked about that with the folks from the Rafters on this program, and we know it needs to be painted again, and I guess there's going to be a little different look.
Yeah, in the off season, you kind of plan for, and there's only a limited off season, because not only does the off season of the baseball team get done, but then there's winter, and so you have a very limited amount of time to get these things done. So one such project you referenced is the grandstand at Whitterfield, and it's a long-standing asset for us, and unfortunately, because it's out and exposed to the elements year-round, there are some challenges with rust and some other things that need to be maintained and taken care of, because we want to maintain the assets so that way we don't have to go, we don't even be thinking about what it would be to replace it or replace sections of it. So at this point, still doing some maintenance work on it, and this fall, a lot of it would happen, is happening underneath the seating. So we removed all the benches, and so the picture I think that you see is the part of the benches have been removed, and so they've begun sanding and stripping some of the rust areas down, and there's some non-skid steps on the steps that are going to be removed, and some of the cranberry color will be fixed. So we've decided that if we're going to spend the money to do it, we have to repaint it when we're done doing all the rust work, at least the floor, that we're going to change the color a little bit. So we're going to go to a kind of a grayer color. So as people remember, it's kind of a seafoam green, and it's going to have a grayish kind of color. So it'll hopefully hide some of the dirt a little bit easier than the previous color did, but also give it a refreshed look when we're done.
Okay. And when do they anticipate having this work done?
Weather permitting.
Weather permitting.
They thought they could get the paint actually one half of it done earlier this week. When the weather forecast changed, they had everything all ready as of Friday last week when the weather was really nice, and they obviously haven't started painting yet. So they've done sandblasting, or they've got everything mobilized so they can do the sandblasting of where the rust and some of the rough spots are, and then begin hopefully this week if the weather, I don't know what the forecast looks like the rest of the week.
Well, tomorrow's supposed to be a real nice day.
Yeah, so they might be painting tomorrow. But it'd be great if we could get the whole thing done yet this fall, so that way in the spring, the rafters do have some planned improvements they're kicking around yet that are just still in conceptual phase, and I'm sure they'll be talking with you about those, and as they share more information with us, we can talk about them on the radio show too. But Whitterfield is one of those things that it's not a cheap asset to maintain, like anything else, but it's a smart investment. We know the return on investment we get for that facility in terms of its visitors, traffic, whether it's people coming from out of town to see, or just the activity for some people something to do in the summertime.
Yeah, it's a huge asset, and it's definitely one worth maintaining, and it's going to be interesting to see the new look to Whitterfield. Of course, this past weekend on Saturday was the final alarm ceremony and procession. There's another asset to have the Wisconsin State Firefighters Memorial in our city. I remember when a variety of community leaders fought to have it here, and firefighter groups said, hey, we got a perfect location for it.
Right on the bend of the river. It's a beautiful spot. It is, isn't it? And so the annual final alarm procession, and then they have the parade, the processional in the evening. A little bit smaller this year than I remember from previous years, but this year we had our special guest, our governor, came to visit and spoke at the event, and it's the only the second governor ever to attend the ceremony or attend the site since its construction, which it struck me that we've
I would
had
think
a number of administrations since I think Tommy Thompson dedicated the site many years ago, and it kind of struck me that it's an important site to the state and to those that serve in the firefighting and emergency response space. That it was nice to see the governor give his kind of a state recognition of the site.
Did you have a chance to visit with?
Yeah, he showed up about 20 minutes early, and so a number of us and actually some of the police force and others were there standing by when he got there, and we're always advised to get to that event early because there's so much planning and procession and all of that, so we have to get there early for that one. So no, it was great. Had a kind of a candid, casual conversation with the governor, and he was here and stayed through the entire thing.
Was he pretty impressed with the memorial?
Yeah, very pleased with it. In fact, he had said that he was just there a month previous on his bike ride, his Harley ride. He had pulled in the parking lot, I guess, for the boat launch when he was here about a month ago, and I didn't realize that. So he had been scoped out the area already in a previous visit.
Okay, well, but we're glad that he visited and saw it. And again, if you've never been to the memorial, it is worth taking a drive by and stopping and seeing what they've done. It's a very it's a
feat by many. Departments all across the state take their turn to maintain it every weekend and to make sure that the grass is picked up and all that work is done to keep it looking sharp. I mean, you would not know that it was volunteers that take care of it if you ever visit.
Yeah, the firefighters, they spread it among their departments to kind of like share it.
Yep.
That's
which is really cool.
Talking about something that's cool, Ward 1. the fall cleanup.
Yeah.
I mean, this is becoming a tradition.
I
mean,
can remember our first visit with Kathy Rosh, I think, on the radio show
Right,
was
right.
at a little over a year or two, almost 2 years ago, probably this next May, when we launched that. And so they're going to do their fall cleanup. They call this a maintenance cleanup, so it isn't the widespread collecting all of the items people don't want. It's more of a yard cleanup, maintenance cleanup to get houses and properties ready for the fall.
Okay, and when will that be happening?
Sounds like this Saturday at 8 a.m. residents are encouraged to join at the park. They've redeveloped that park, which is near St. Lawrence and that over there. And I think that's also a real shining star example of residents coming together to recognize that the park probably needed some TLC, and they gave it some TLC. Boy, they put in the basketball hoops and put in a paved surface and bleachers.
And this is a really cool. This is not an area with a lot of high income.
Right.
I mean, these are folks of modest means coming together and saying, "Hey, we want to clean up our neighborhood."
Correct. Yeah, and there wasn't really a safe offering on the north side of West Grand, so I think that obviously achieved that objective as well, of getting a safe place for kids so they don't have to cross West Grand necessarily to go to a playground. And I drive by it every once in a while, and there's always kids playing. I mean, it's amazing.
I like to
me
see that. I mean, that
they
means
are
they're
taking
not
advantage of it.
And they're not doing the texting, and they're out doing playing buckets or getting some exercise.
That's right, especially when the weather's good. They're out and about.
Yeah,
and it's a safe place, I think. For kids to hang out, so they're not.
And that gives you a sense of neighborhood when you have something like that. That reminds me of my youth and neighborhood pickup games of basketball and the like. Okay, where I learned, hey, I'm not an athlete. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink. Good morning.
Good morning. Say, I called in a while ago. It was when Mayor Carson was on, and I had a suggestion. If you're driving down 8th Street and the light turns yellow, sometimes you don't have time to stop, but if you go through, it turns red. And I think it would be real helpful if the lights could flash yellow for 10 seconds, then turn yellow, and then turn red. And that would give you an extra 10 seconds, and you could see it's going to turn before you get right on top of it. And it would all be safer, because if you're going down and it turns yellow and you jump on the brakes, what about the guy that's behind you?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Could you comment on that?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting suggestion. Unfortunately, all of the traffic signals and signs and everything else is state mandated, so it comes down from the state, the municipal handbook, or the uniform handbook as it goes to roadways. So that'd have to be a state allowance. Now they've seen in some cities, and I don't think we've got one yet in our city, is the left turn arrows that will flash yellow, so you're not having to sit for a red arrow anymore. I think Plover is a close example of that. So if you're looking, if you're trying to turn left and want to catch the light, that's an ability to do that. But as far as the city going ahead and deciding that it wants to turn yellow, the yellow caution light to flashing, it's not something we have the power to do.
Okay. I think you hung up. Okay. So, yeah, I think sometimes people don't understand. We might have a great idea, but the state says, excuse me. So if that gentleman wanted to pursue this, contact our state legislators.
State legislators, and then the DOT. I think the DOT might be able to. There's also the state transportation folks that he could contact that are obviously Secretary of Transportation and others. The other comment I would make is when you adjust any sort of cycle time on one through stretch, the other through stretch gets affected. So if you extend 10 seconds, let's say, on the through, that's 10 seconds longer that gets affected off of the traffic that's looking to get moved. So we're talking over in Lincoln and the expressway by River Cities Bank and the Chamber of Commerce, discussions about how we can maybe retime that signal, because it's a quick light if you're coming up to Lincoln.
And that can be a very dangerous intersection.
Correct, because there's a couple of intersections there that are compounding the factor too. So that's something that the perspective that I kind of learned was, as we take and add time to certain signals, that removes time off the others. So the light won't stay green as long on the expressway, for example. And I know as people want to travel through the area, the less time they have to wait for lights is important. So it's a trade-off.
Okay. We're going to take our final break, and then we'll be back with more with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine right after these. Welcome back to the Morning Magazine and our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Again, the phone lines are open at 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone. And with that, let's get right back to the phones. And, Your Honor, ma'am, you have the floor to talk to your mayor.
Hello. I've got two questions. One, is there any way better directions can be put on the roundabouts? I go from 2nd Avenue around to Gaynor, which is fine, but it doesn't show a special definition to go that way. And if you go from 2nd Ave onto 10th, sometimes there's no direction there either. We've even had a woman who could come from Gaynor in the wrong direction.
I've seen that a time or two. You know, that is one of the first roundabouts in the state, and I know the state has obviously their offices right there, so they can see that firsthand. But I know that's something that that they've talked about because we've actually discussed how we're going to reconstruct parts of that because it is somewhat of a difficult roundabout for trucks to navigate. Because it was one of the first iterations of them. But in terms of signage, I don't know if anything specific has been talked about signage, but I can make sure that continues to be part of the conversation.
Terrific, thank you. And I got one more question.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
Where do we get a book that tells landowners what are the rules in it? I know there's a 3-inch grass law, but a lot of seniors can't pay for it every other day because their grass is growing.
Sure. So you're looking for the ordinances, essentially, that that are enforced?
Right.
I'm not sure if we've got a published version of that, but I can make a look. The question, you could probably call City Hall directly,
Okay.
and they might have something they can print off and send to you. 421-8200, and that's the city clerk's office, but you can get transferred over to the ordinance control department, or they might have an answer for you there too.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you for your call.
Welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, that's how easy it is, folks. Just get on the phone, dial 424-2600, pound 1320 on a U.S. cellular phone, and you can talk to the mayor. Since we're getting into that season again, there was a story on the wire about salt costs, and like for this winter, what's the situation with the city in terms of its snow removal budget going forward and the stuff it needs to do the job?
Well, that is the one wild card.
Yeah.
When we talk about budget and sort of planning and trying to hope for the best and all that sort of thing, one issue is snow removal and the costs associated with it. You know, last year we talked a lot about how it was the costliest winter on record for the city to process its snow operations. So whether it was removing snow, salting, scraping, what have you, that was the most costly year on average or in record. $1,036, I think, was the final tally on that. So, it's one of those things that it did wipe out our reserves. So this year we hope, we do have some contingency dollars to fund these things. Then in case we do get in a situation where the winter is again. Let's hope not, but as bad as it was last winter for removal. So we do have the rolling 3-year average budgeted in the budget for snow removal, but it's one of those things that you got to hope for the best. Now our salt situation, we do buy about a 20% contingency, plus we have the ability to get a surplus amount if should that, it's kind of an option to buy, if you will, on the salt purchasing.
Okay, what about the price this year?
I haven't seen any of the salt costs, so that must be when was the release?
It was just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
It mentioned out like in Manitowoc County and something. It mentioned it's up, but it's not as high as it could be. And some they mentioned in Ohio they're really getting socked, and so I was curious how far in advance. The article, one of the things it mentions is that buying farther in advance can save you some money. Just wondering what's the situation with our area, and also municipalities getting together with the county to
Yeah, well, one of the things we've talked about this last spring was there was a lot of talk about the salt brine and how
Right.
do we use some additional or different methods to activate the
Okay.
salt so you use less salt. And I know that the city of Marshfield and the county actually assisted us in doing a pilot, and I believe the pilot's going to continue yet this fall as it relates to trying to activate the salt quicker, because when you drop salt it bounces.
Right.
Oftentimes it bounces up off the street and into the boulevard. Well, what good is it in the boulevard? So the activated salt brine will then kind of liquefy the application, and it'll be much more effective, right? It
Sure.
hits the street that much quicker. So that I know is happening. That was something that we planned for yet this fall. In terms of materials, we had about a $60,000 jump in our materials cost for snow and ice removal. So from that standpoint, from a material standpoint, we've got enough budgeted to cover a number of major snow events and ice events. The problem is when it comes in 1 or 2 inch increments, and then we get ice on top of it, that's when we really deplete
Yeah.
the reserves of what we have for salt and
Well,
sand.
the worst storm of any winter is ice,
Mm-hmm.
because no one end up with lots of accidents.
Right.
People can't drive on it. It takes a lot of treatment to get it melted.
Mm-hmm.
Snow, you can scrape. I mean, we know how to deal with snow,
Yeah.
but we're not good on ice.
Yep.
Okay.
In our just for rough numbers for people, we budgeted for the so this is a calendar year, remember, so this would start January 1, but $687,000 in snow and ice control for 2015. So a lot of dollars go into to dealing with this white stuff and the ice and everything else that falls.
Okay, and then you touched on it briefly with with like concrete pavement and the like. Really bad winters do a
No
number on
question.
streets, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we're still catching up with what happened from last winter.
Yeah, and as you can see, the last probably 2 weeks, street maintenance crews have been around applying new joint repairs to a lot of the concrete streets. So Jackson Street, I saw them up by City Hall this morning. So what they're doing is they're applying a little bit different. You used to see that pea gravel stuff get
Yeah.
applied, and I'll tell you, half that stuff falls out of the cracks as before even winter comes, and the plows hit it, so the rest of it's gone. So they're using a little bit different material and application to kind of heat it into place. That cold mix stuff, it fills a hole, but for how long? And so this
Yeah.
heat applied stuff will theoretically last much longer.
Okay, so is that going to be the new trend then for
Well,
fixing
it's,
it?
it's all continuously trying new things to
Yeah.
see what works and what stays.
Well, yeah, if it can stay, it's going to save money.
Correct. Yeah.
Because you're right, the dry stuff,
Yeah.
and
It's just tar essentially with some
Yeah.
rocks in it. And
yeah, and the hole is back by
Mhm.
in another week or two, especially on your busy streets.
Right, especially when things expand and contract with moisture and freezing and thawing. That's the other havoc that gets applied to some of these streets, particularly the concrete ones.
Are we looking at any major street projects with this budget?
Yeah, that's a good segue maybe to talk about street reconstruction. There are some potential changes yet because it's just been proposed. The council will adopt the budget in November. But as far as public works construction, we do have a little bit of an uptick in our construction fund for next year and what we're going to fund. So next year we've got proposed a big project will be Chestnut Street from 8th Street to 16th Street. In some areas the crown of the street has failed. The street pavement is 66 years old originally, and with a 30-year overlay, so it's in the 5 and 6 area for condition. The curb and gutter is fair in some areas, but poor in others. And then the underground, that's the stuff we don't see and we don't feel. But there's been some lining and some other things. So Chestnut from 8th to 16th has been proposed. There's a project on Apple Street, which is just near there. Apple Street is an interesting one because there's a house there that had a septic system and its own water system. And there's no curb and gutter there either, so that's another area that'll be done. So the sanitary was put in 1928
Wow.
on that particular street. So the curb and gutter is 55 to 90 years old.
Wow.
One of the oldest. So that's been on the docket for some time. Again, not a cheap reconstruction, but that's one that's been proposed.
Bottom line, of course, everyone wants to know what does this mean for taxpayers? What are we looking at for a tax rate?
At this point, in the city tax rate, we're projecting a 1.2% increase in the city's tax rate, which is our allowable amount. We can't go above that. And so that'll allow us to do some of the additional reconstruction projects and some of the maintenance we talked about. The tax bill discussion now, we haven't set our levy, nor has school district and other. The interesting thing that the state legislature did was pulled the technical college off the tax levy, or at least a portion of it. And so city taxpayers, or tax bills, will probably go down because there'll be less portion on that, and that's been that whole, you hear the political ads, we just heard them in the breaks about property tax relief. Well, frankly, it's a shell game, and it's pulling things off the property tax then to fund them in other ways, and they're funding the technical college in this way, somewhat from the general fund. So it's all about shifting dollars and showing relief here so we can feel this there. And
yeah, well, everybody, both parties have done it. They've been doing it forever, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
We take from here to cover here, and then we tell you, oh, we cut your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
No, you just moved money around.
Well, and we have to budget, right? We have to balance our budget. The state, unfortunately, can run some deficits and cover their bases in their next biennium. We're hearing that discussion right now about the structural deficit. It's just, it makes you makes your head spin when you really get into it. But I'll tell you, it's really simple, and we just don't have. Governors from way back of both parties have overspent and have overprojected tax revenue or tax collections, and we just had a Taxpayers Alliance, which is a nonpartisan group, speak at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast just
Todd
recently.
Berry.
And, yeah, Todd was great. He was really
He's very good at
articulate.
explaining that shell game.
Exactly. Yeah, it was very well received. I think just some stuff that some people in the room don't want to hear about, certain administrations and
yeah, he's
but
like
it's
you
the
say,
truth. It's the
he
absolute
doesn't
truth.
care whether you got a D or an R by your
That's
name.
right.
He just goes by numbers.
Yep, and in this level, in the municipal level, it doesn't matter either. And so that's the world he and I connected, because that's the world we live in.
Yeah, here's what the numbers say.
Yeah,
Don't give me.
Mm-hmm.
And
There's accounting gimmicks you can play with budgets and the state level with structural deficits, whether a deficit or not, and all that. It's crazy.
Yeah, and then you wonder why people get cynical.
Yes, yes.
Well, we're coming up on 1 minute to go, and so I guess people will. When's the public hearing on the budget?
It'll be the third Tuesday in November, so the week before deer season, the week before Thanksgiving, I believe, the way the calendar falls, which will be the 18th, I believe, of November.
Okay.
That'll be our day.
Okay.
I'll be back on the show on the 19th.
Okay, so let's keep it in mind. Keep it on your calendar. In the meantime, when the Finance Committee is meeting and looking at this document, show up, and if they give you a chance to speak your mind, speak your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now's the time to do it. Your Honor, as always, I appreciate your time from your busy schedule. And,
thank you to listeners.
And we'll visit next month.
All right, Carl.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this edition of the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com.